Welcome, everybody. My name is Randy Gregg. I'm Executive Director of the Portland Parks Foundation, and welcome to Back to Square One. I hope, really appreciate everyone taking some time out of their Monday evening. I hope you are all well equipped for a happy hour conversation about the future of O'Bryant Square and some thinking about public space, what public space looks like in 2023. I am going to share screen again, and one moment here. There we go. What's everything without a Zoom issue? Okay, there we go. So we want to ask some really basic questions. What should a new downtown public plaza be in 2023, excuse me? Who is it for? What is it for? Who should design it? And who can bring it to life? And our overwhelming answer is you. And so the Portland Parks Foundation, the Center for Public Interest Design, the Loeb Fellowship, and Portland Parks and Recreation have come together to make a really different kind of community involvement process and community vision come to be. I want to thank US Bank for sponsoring these conversations. There's going to be a number of them, which we'll get to in a little bit. I want to thank the Loeb Fellowship for their contribution to this. I'll talk a little more about that later. The North Star Civic Foundation and Metro, ZGF, Travel Portland, and our friends at Project Henneberry Eddy Architects and GBD. So we have a really amazing opportunity. It may not look like it right now, but O'Bryant Square is going to change rather quickly in the coming weeks. Now, as you might remember, back in 2018, structural issues forced the garage to be closed, and so too the surface. And in the coming weeks, demolition will happen. The trees will be saved, and the garage will be filled in, and the surface will be left quote unquote park ready. We don't know for sure what the surface is going to be. We're still exploring that. And the block will be kind of akin to like a European square, sort of an empty open space. And I think that's a scary idea for a lot of people, but we believe this is an opportunity. So first off, I think we can think about this square as something different from the get-go. Hugh O'Bryant, I'm sure he tried hard. He was our first mayor. He had a one-year term that ushered in the first charter reform movement. He did, I want to acknowledge, he did give some books that formed the early collection of the Multnomah County Library, so that's important. But for the most part, he was not an incredibly important person in Portland's history. But in the earliest maps, the block was called Park Block 1. It was part of a series of parks. So we'll start calling it that in an effort to kind of clear the slate. So what we have an opportunity here is a blank slate to create a flexible design that we can try out some stuff before permanent improvements are made. And it's a place to develop innovative and welcoming ways to take care of both visitors and downtown's existing populations. We think it's an opportunity to really think boldly. And as I mentioned, a renaming opportunity. So back to these fundamental questions. So who's the you? We're going to be reaching out to all kinds of groups: social services, the residents, urban advocates, arts groups, the adjacent property owners, of course, businesses, food vendors and retailers, and also important constituency is downtown youth. Who are we? The Portland Parks Foundation, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we've been around for about 22 years. We've done projects all over the city. Our motto is we help people help parks. So we really try to wed private sector initiative and money to public improvements of parks. And our biggest project was the Barbara Walker Crossing, which links the Wildwood Trail over Burnside, over what was a really dangerous crossing. We finished that about 3 years ago. We were involved in Director Park. We have an annual festival called Paseo, where we have brought communities of color together to basically organize their own festival in downtown. And then we're currently working on the restoration and hopefully return of the Thompson elk statue. That's just a few of our activities. The Loeb Fellowship is a fellowship program that I was very lucky to be part of. It's a 50-year-old program. About 400 Loeb Fellows at one time or another have gone through Harvard. Mid-career professionals looking to kind of backfill and expand their horizons. And we're bringing a great group of folks with different expertise in areas around public space, ranging from real estate to trauma-informed design, to mobile architecture, to youth, and to public outreach methodologies. We're going to have a whole series of talks by these folks. Hope you can tune into at least some of them. It's a very ambitious series, but it's a really, really great group of thinkers, and we're pairing each of them up with local thinkers. So this is just a sample. You can go to our website and see the full roster and register. And then, of course, we have the Center for Public Interest Design in Portland Parks and Recreation. Representatives from them will speak in a little bit. The schedule and deliverables, we're going to do our community vision over the course of a few days in March. We will show the fruits of that, of all of that public outreach and the ideas that we're able to distill from it on March 11th. In May, we'll begin to shape a proposal for interim design, programming, and management, and in summer and fall, first phase implementation. The demolition's happening much quicker, I think, than a lot of us thought. And so we're kind of have to move pretty fast. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history before I pass the microphone, so to speak, to the others. So O'Bryant was christened in 1973. The property was gifted with the proviso that there'd be parking underneath it. It was Portland's first public space over a parking garage. It won a bunch of design awards at the time and was a pretty innovative space. It came in the wake of the Halpern fountains in South Downtown, if you know those, anchored by Keller Fountain. You can see a lot of that influence in it. And at the start, it was an address. People advertised office space on O'Bryant Square. Lots of events happened there. Protests happened there. So it was a very, very lively space. But it gradually, the fountain started leaking and various things started to go wrong with the square. And then in 1984, when Pioneer Courthouse Square opened, it had a dedicated nonprofit to programming it all the time. And O'Bryant became a kind of lonely place and got sort of branded as Needle Park and Paranoid Park. It really changed over time. And it had a brief sort of return to life, courtesy of the food carts, the Alder Street food cart pod, but it was often empty, although in this case it was filled with Santa Claus during SantaCon. Now I want to offer a little bit of context because we're putting a lot of effort into this, and I think it's important. A lot of times downtown kind of gets branded as it's all business people, it's all big property owners, and it's all condo owners. Actually, if you look pretty closely at O'Bryant and its surrounding and downtown and the people who live there, it's actually pretty diverse, particularly economically. This is a map of economic uncertainty of folks experiencing challenges. And when you look at downtown, it starts to look like outer East Portland. And so that's the context that we're designing in. Sure, there's lots of stuff happening that is around it that is geared towards tourists and high-end shoppers and all kinds of things. But the people who are actually occupying downtown are a lot like our friends in East Portland. There's some interesting context around O'Bryant. These two blue lines mark basically the I-5 of fiber brackets O'Bryant Square. And that's led to some interesting things. We have both some blank wall buildings around it, which don't really, fronted it with really good uses like retail and whatnot. But we also have entire buildings that are devoted to telco. equipment. The Pittock block, which is on the top of this slide, is actually a critical infrastructure facility. The entire state's 911 system is run through the servers in there. And so while this is all very important to how we operate day to day, it doesn't make for a very good neighbors for a park. It doesn't bring the office workers and the retail uses that really make for, you know, a lively urban plaza. And then Multnomah County remodeled an old building to the north, and that's a trauma-informed mental health facility, behavioral mental health facility there. And so that's created another interesting neighbor for the plaza. And then if you beam back, you find some interesting patterns. There's a lot of new development, over $1 billion, pretty close to the square. That will ultimately generate quite a lot of tax revenue for the city if those buildings are put to full use. And then to the north, we have a whole cluster of social service agencies. So we have this kind of really interesting contrast of you know, folks who are surrounding the square. And then we have some new things coming in. The Green Loop will go around O'Brien Square. Which is, you know, going to be a, you know, really important and interesting new piece of infrastructure that will bring a lot of people to it. So that's a good use. And so real quickly, I wanted to just kind of show you some of the thinking about this area of town, because over the last, since I've been here in the 90s, we've seen a lot of ideas for this. This is one by our former mayor, Neil Goldschmidt, and Tom Moyer, a prominent property owner who began buying up all the buildings in between the two parks and wanted to mow them all down for a grand plaza there. PPR did a study back in 2005 that even looked at partial development of the block to put, you know, more eyes on the block. To the left, you'll see a proposal by Hulse that was just a sort of study of the interstitial spaces. On the top is a proposal by Mayor Reed that was done in consort with the Director of Park Development. And then on the bottom is a scheme for a sort of grand trellis that Allied Works did. What's actually happening now is PBOT's going to be doing the study of several spaces around the square, and Nick Falbo will talk more about that. And then whoops, this slide shouldn't be in there. What is also happening on the ground is this. So next to the Ritz-Carlton, there will be this street plaza that can be blocked off. The Ritz-Carlton's food hall will open onto it. They have a really great group of restaurateurs who will be in there, and so it'll spill out. So it'll be a really different space there. And that gives you a sense of what it looks like in perspective, or what it will look like. And so there's a lot of exciting things happening, and we want to get everybody involved in thinking about what O'Brien can be. And with that, I hope you all can take our surveys. Sabrina will put the link in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Lillard, who will tell you, and Ross Swanson from PPR, who are going to tell you a little bit about their work. Thank you.
Hi, Laura is, hello, everyone. First of all, from the Parks Department, I want to thank Randy and the foundation for putting together this great conversation over the next 6 to 8 weeks. We're really happy and excited to be here with Todd and the CPID, as well as the Lobes. And I want to acknowledge the ambition you have with the broad, diverse group of people that you want to talk about. It is really great. So I am Ross Swanson. I'm going to do a quick introduction to the team of the 2 people at the Parks Department who will be along for the ride on this conversation. I am half of the capital program manager for the Parks Department, meaning we design and build and maintain the parks that we have. With me, and who's going to be doing the vast majority of the conversation today, is Laura Lillard. She's a relatively new project manager with us, but has a long history with Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, particularly in the urban design group in downtown Portland. So we are here because we're the parcel owner. We own the park, and we have a lot of vested interest in that because what goes in here, we will be the ones who maintain, probably lead in the development and oversee the day-to-day operations. So with that, we look forward to this great conversation. And we're coming at this from a little bit of humility with COVID kind of changed how everything happens, how we see Parks Department, how you guys see the parks and active recreation space. And we'll let Laura go a little bit more into that in particular. Let's see, in particular, she's going to be talking a little bit, Randy gave a little overview about the context for the park, but we also see our parks as sort of a park system. In particular, Laura will go over the context for how we see the Central City Park system working. And then also she'll drop into trends, because one of the things that I think we learned at Parks Department is you guys like to recreate, and you like to recreate more and more, and you're telling us what we're missing. So we come in here with an open mind on that. We hope to have 2 deliverables in the end of this. One is a preferred program idea that we can probably hope to implement in late summer. We have a history of this. Gateway Green, back in 2016, off-road cycling was coming to the Parks Department, new to us, not so new to the rest of the recreation world, but we also had an awkward space out in wedged between 2 freeways. So as a way to deal with that, we ended up spending about 12% of our budget at the time, laid out some features so we could learn how folks recreate in that realm, and it has turned out to be a big success. We'd like to do that here too as well. We'd like to get an idea of a good program, run forward and see what implementation means as far as the day-to-day operations, and actually put something on the ground. The second idea, the second deliverable we would anticipate out of this would be that whatever that preferred option is also has some sort of schematic design idea of how it could manifest itself in a permanent form. And before we get into the funding question, I guess we'll just, if I could beg for your patience, we'll punt that one down the road and see what happens. How this park gets programmed will play into what funding sources are available to us. And I'll just leave it simple at that. But just know in the background, the folks in the Parks Department will be sort of scheming and thinking about funding strategies as whatever develops out of this long conversation develops. So Laura, I'll get out of the way and hit mute, and it's all yours.
Great. And just give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Okay, great. Just gonna change slides here. So I know this is a bit of a diverse audience. So I just wanted to really zoom out and give context for Portland Parks and Recreation and give our lens as we design and build parks throughout the city. Portland Parks and Recreation owns and manages over 11,000 acres, which equates to over 200 parks and natural areas. And that represents over 15% of the land area, making us the second largest landowner in the city behind the Bureau of Transportation. It also means we have an extreme maintenance backlog. Each one of our parks, as you can imagine, is facing pressure with future growth and density. But on the positive side, we have over 200 friends and nonprofits that play a role in stewardship and programming. And we have a methodical and engaging public project selection process that I'm not going to go over here, but I do want to mention the criteria that helps us prioritize for projects. And we can give a link to that process because I'm going to oversimplify it in the interest of time. We look at households being served within a half-mile radius, who is being served. So the high percentages of people of color, high percentages of children and youth 18 years and younger, and high percentages of households below the poverty line using the census. This is a guide for us. But we have other considerations like the higher numbers of seniors or people with health conditions or impairments to help us in the selection of projects. To look at the Central City, Portland's comprehensive plan calls for the Central City to take on 30% of the city's future growth of 125,000 households. And it's worth noting those pie charts at the bottom there illustrate that the Central City is taking on this 30% within its 3% of the whole city's land area, making it the densest and most built out landmass in the city and region and state. The downtown and West End specifically are expected to grow several thousand households combined. And the Central City is also expected to continue to grow the largest number of affordable housing units in the city, because the city requires affordable housing with every development over 19 units. So that's sort of the lay of the land for the central city where our project sits in terms of population growth. Zooming in, O'Brien Square or Park Block 1 is downtown and adjacent to West End neighborhoods, but it is also blocks away from the Pearl District and Old Town Chinatown. It's very well connected to the rest of the city by light rail and streetcar. And I'm going to walk through some of the adjacent parks and programming just to give a sense of what's there today and how this park can fit into and complement the parks in our system. The square is nestled along the North Park blocks and the South Park blocks, which is, as Randy mentioned, some of the city's earliest platted contiguous walking parks and plazas. This particular square is one of the non-continuous park blocks between Director Park, which includes the water feature, a large pavilion, and a leasable kiosk building to the south of Park Block 1. And Ankeny Park West, which is currently home to outdoor seating for a small food cart pod that surrounds it. The park blocks do feature some small recreational facilities. The North Park blocks has a new playground, basketball courts, and bocce courts, and the South Park blocks features a playground at the very southern end. Each of these parks is 100 feet by 200 feet. So everything that gets programmed in there is sitting within a very tight space. The northernmost section of the North Park blocks that you can see in that dashed line is being designed with the Broadway corridor, which I know Nolan Leinhart is here to talk about. And Portland Parks and Recreation has started the design process for the 2 new parks there. And the first one should start construction in 3 to 5 years. And then I would just say the South Park blocks is home to 2 farmers markets, and it recently finished a master plan process. It's envisioned to add more seating, small flexible event space closer to the Portland State University campus, and a rotating art exhibit space near the museum and theaters, among other features. This park system, as Randy mentioned, will be more formally connected by the pedestrian and bicycle path known as the Green Loop, which connects the park blocks and other open spaces through the entire central city across the river. O'Brien Square, as Randy noted, is that really important pivot point for the Green Loop alignment. And I know Nick will share how the street plazas at Harvey Milk and 9th are envisioned to activate in the near term. This slide is really just meant to prime the pump for discussions that will happen over the next few weeks about near-term activation. We see this as an opportunity to test and determine what makes sense before the fully funded future state. As Ross mentioned, the first several months of COVID and the years that followed have been an opportunity for people to experiment with and create open spaces or the sense of public spaces where they didn't exist, and to use it differently, or to reacquaint themselves with the park system. And they did. Public use of our park system has skyrocketed. People have also begun to notice what's missing from the neighborhood parks and open spaces. And the public has been very assertive about what they've noticed in this moment in terms of advocacy for skate parks and pickleball, off-road cycling, futsal courts, food, seating, and flexible spaces. Informally, what we have learned about park use in the last 2 to 3 years is, open space is valuable. It continues to be valuable. Recreation is important and needed, especially as downtown densities increase. Unused spaces become unused spaces. So we really want to just have positive programming of public space, which is necessary for its success. And we're really excited to listen and be engaged with local leaders and national experts in this discussion. So I will leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks, Laura. Next up is Nick Falvo with PBOT.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Falvo. I'm a senior transportation planner at the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and we are very excited to become a part of what's the next phase for O'Brien Square. Randy explained some of the challenges of the current site. We're really excited with construction starting soon to do everything we can to preserve those trees and to manage some of the infrastructure issues that are on site. But we're really enthusiastic about bringing it to a kind of park-ready state over the course of the next 6 months or so. So as this exploration of what comes next progresses, I'm here because I really wanted to orient folks to the intersection of streets in my bureau and the Bureau of Transportation, and how we can think of them as public spaces. Over the last few years, we've seen a dramatic change in the way that our businesses and our community engage with their streets. And with it, we see a real opportunity to align with projects like O'Brien Square. When COVID hit, PBOT did all that we could to support our communities and our businesses impacted by the public health crisis. And one of our more visible programs was called the Healthy Businesses Permit Program, which let businesses spill out into the street. In some cases, businesses could come together and occupy entire streets. We saw this as a real opportunity. In the early days, it was really just simple barricades blocking off the street and places for the businesses to operate. But we wanted to ask how we could welcome the public into these spaces. In the coming years, 2021, 2022, we started to experiment with creating public street plazas. We worked with businesses and community groups and proposed enhancements to these sites with decorations, with plantings, paintings, public seating, and community activation. We've got, depends on how you count, roughly 15 sites around the city that we're working with businesses and partners on. A few of them you can see here. Dream Street in Northeast Portland, working with the Seoul District Business Association, is a great example of a neighborhood scale street plaza site. In the central city, we have a few. Northwest 13th Avenue, this is a street that's long imagined as a pedestrianized corridor. We get to do experiments to see how that might work. And only a few blocks from the site of O'Brien Square is the Cart Blocks, a public-private partnership that's meant to support small businesses operating here in a street plaza in the right-of-way. These sites are just inherently temporary, but we are excited to explore how we can formalize at least some of these sites and have them stick around as permanent expansions of public spaces. Just the end of last year, PBOT was awarded a grant from the Economic Development Administration to expand and enhance these temporary street plaza locations. We're looking at sites in the West End near Harvey Milk, as well as sites along the Green Loop, which is an alignment that runs along the North and South Park blocks adjacent to O'Brien Square. We'll be developing street plaza design standards for our kind of growing network of street plazas, but we really hope that in situations like this, where we're in close proximity to other spaces, that these spaces can be designed in concert to reflect each other and build on each other. You've heard a little bit about the Green Loop in today's presentations. It's a future planning concept of a 6-mile linear park and path that really invites Central City residents to experience Portland Central City in an entirely new way. And what you see here is really this vision that the Green Loop can not only connect public spaces, but really embrace them as an integral part of what makes that space succeed. This isn't the first set of street plazas along the Green Loop. Randy showed this image earlier. This is the park, 9th Avenue at the Ritz-Carlton, and they're designing a wonderful street plaza experience just to the south of O'Brien Square. And I think, it gives you a hint of what this might be able to look like further along the corridor. And I think as we're getting into the future of O'Brien Square, I want to make sure that our inspiration for what happens in the square doesn't just end at the curb, but instead can embrace the wider street context as an intentional and complementary part of placemaking. And what you see here is sort of the full Green Loop alignment wrapping around O'Brien Square, connecting from those cart blocks to the north and the Ritz-Carlton to the south. So future conversations can consider kind of how these boundaries exist or don't as public space and programming and activation is being created. And so thanks everyone for the chance to share that with you. I'm excited for the conversation and the Q&A.
Thanks, Nick. so great to be able to look at this entire context of streetscapes and squares. And with that, I'd like to introduce Todd Ferry with Center for Public Interest Design, who will be an essential partner to this. He can talk a little bit about how they operate and some of the projects they've done in the past. So take it away, Todd.
Thanks so much, Randy. I'm so happy to be here with you all, exploring this exciting project. I'm Todd Ferry. I'm with the Center for Public Interest Design at Portland State University, and I'll share a little bit about our center and participatory processes in terms of how we're thinking about these upcoming events around O'Brien Square. Our Center for Public Interest Design, we are involved in a lot of things from, we work with students and as fellows program and classes, we work with faculty, we have staff, fellows of practice, all sorts of things. So when I say we, I'm talking about a bunch of amazing people who are involved here. But at the heart of what we do is design based on participatory processes. So it's really community-based and informed in that way. So even if we're designing a building like this, which is a project we did in Inner Mongolia, China, we're giving equal attention to the tools that are going to allow us to facilitate a conversation. In this case, a chalkboard model, so we could have better conversations with our collaborators. So as we approach the O'Brien Square project, we're going to be thinking about public space and what it means to truly involve as many voices as possible. So with a light rail station that we have under construction right now in Sacramento with Sacramento Regional Transit, it's not just a matter of designing the station, it's designing the conversation and the tools and different ways that we can bring out all of the things that we need to understand and that the ultimate designers need to understand to make this work. And then documenting that conversation. So that'll be a big role that we play is documenting the conversation and making all of this public. We think a lot about placemaking and activation, even temporary activation, which will be a big part of the park, right? While the park is waiting for long-term design, there are going to be temporary activations to inform it. And our collaboration with the Portland Opera, this you might have come across Opera a la carte in terms of free performances they do in the summertime. But even with this, there was a temporary pop-up set of performances that informed the design. So rather than just designing it, we're trying singers on top of it and inside of it and in front of it. So we're hearing from the opera singers and we're hearing from the people who are experiencing opera in a new way that all ultimately goes into that design. In terms of public space and temporary activation, as Nick was saying, we're seeing that happen in the street plazas around Portland more than anywhere else, probably at the moment. And there's all sorts of interesting ways that people have come in and participated in that, and Portland's amazing architecture and design community have contributed in a lot of fantastic ways. Our center was able to work on the Arleta Triangle Square Plaza last year, and this was led by a fellow of practice, Scott Mooney, who's an architect at Bora. We work with quite a bit. And this was for a permanent plaza in the Mount Scott neighborhood. So this was informed through conversation with all sorts of stakeholders in the area, through feedback from surveys, and then painted with the community to become an active space. And when we think about participatory processes, it's not just taking in information in this case, right? It's painting with the community, it's activating with, but then also looking for opportunities such as the benches and planters that occupy the square. These were actually through a partnership with Anderson Construction and local schools. These were built by local middle schoolers throughout Portland as part of a STEM program, and then they are peppered on site. And so it really expands. The participation is not just simply about the outcome, but the process itself becomes really important and empowering. An example of involving the architecture and landscape architecture community in the process, which we plan to do for O'Brien Square, I think we can see a good example with the Kenton Women's Village. A few years ago, after the city declared a state of emergency on homelessness, we and a lot of great partners invited the architecture community to sit down with people experiencing homelessness, interested in creating villages with lived experience, and came up with designs. 14 teams formed from that. And what you're seeing here are 3 different sets of design from different teams. Those teams went on to actually, the firms built themselves these pods. In just a couple months, they were then displayed downtown. And the actual conversation at the initial design workshop was participation. The display of these were participation, and then the feedback on the pods themselves from people who would ultimately live in them was all part of this. And a couple years later, when Kent Women's Village was getting a more permanent home, that now the construction community stepped up, and 21 construction teams built and donated pods to that project. And so while this could have been done a lot of different ways, through all of these different stakeholders, they are better, they're more informed, and it continues to build on itself. One way that we think about a lot of this work is through asset-based processes. And that happens a lot in terms of working on affordable housing. And it's beginning with a recognition that if a new investment's coming and there are already amazing people around, that this is an asset and a strength that we can leverage, as opposed to beginning with a deficit-based model, which I think that sometimes Portland gets in the habit of thinking about being defensive and solving a problem rather than being aspirational. A project that we might work on around asset-based community development like this was a project, an affordable housing unit developed by community development partners, designed by Ben Wechter Architects. This is in the Rockwood neighborhood in Gresham. But not only will the residents who live here be connected with local social services and infrastructure, but the infrastructure brought to it itself creates a park for the community and a community center. So I think that sometimes if someone heard something like affordable housing, there would be this defensiveness, but asset-based community development wants to think differently. And I think we can apply that to a process around a park. Right now, the Winter Lights Festival is happening, which is an incredible example of temporary placemaking, of activation, and of aspirational thinking. So this is this is the building I'm sitting in right now, Shattuck Hall on PSU's campus. And of course, it happens all over Portland, but it is it's an amazing project that's thinking aspirationally and not thinking that it's cold, it's wet, it's nighttime. Rather, it's thinking, here's an opportunity for joy and activation. And we're seeing that for all of those of you who've visited the Light Festival. So what we're working toward is talks that are coming up, this community visioning process that Randy spoke about at the beginning, happening March 8th through 11th, that we hope you'll participate in. But the activations are part of a process. The feedback for temporary activations, that'll continue to inform proposals. And so this isn't a one-time chance for feedback. I think it's an ongoing process that we want to invite as many people to partake in as possible. And so I think that's where we are, and I will stop there.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I sort of messed up because of a misplaced webinar chat box, and I skipped over Nolan. So we were going to kind of do, Todd and I were sort of going to, bracket this, and I overlooked Nolan, who was going to offer sort of a wider view of connecting all of this to the Broadway corridor and to the aspirations on the horizon for the park system going north. And then also he's been around Portland for a long time and has worked in urban design at ZGF for a long time. And so we were just really interested to get his sort of observations of our public space system downtown. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nolan. And just imagine that he's actually before Todd. So in your minds.
Well,
thanks.
I thought I was last on the list of folks, so this worked out perfectly. Want to talk really briefly, a brief overview of the Central City Master Plan for the U.S. Postal Service site, which is a 14-acre parcel at the core of a broader planning area known as the Broadway Corridor. My colleagues at ZGF and I prepared a framework plan for the site in 2015, and then worked with Place Landscape Architects, who led open space planning for our Central City Master Plan, completed in 2020. We were fortunate to have great partners in Prosper Portland, Portland Parks and Recreation, and the Portland Housing Bureau, and the Portland Bureau of Transportation in developing the master plan concepts that I'm sharing today. So I'd like to start just by orienting everyone to where this site lies, really at the intersection of the north end of the park blocks and the west end of the Broadway Bridge, where it splits into Lovejoy Street heading west and Broadway heading south. The Broadway corridor is this 32-acre area outlined in orange, including the 14-acre Postal Service site outlined in white. Some of you,
I think I'm not seeing a screen share.
Oh
so
no!
Oh
my gosh. Okay, sorry about that.
Interrupt you.
This is why other people say, "Can everyone see the screen?" Okay. Okay, how's that?
Yep, it's starting.
Great.
Okay, there we go. Excellent.
Great. So again, in orange is the broader Broadway corridor planning area, and then in white is the, or in the labeled USPS site is the U.S. Postal Service facility. And many of you may have seen that demolition of the facility is underway, which is a really nice visible milestone for the site's redevelopment. O'Brien Square is shown at the bottom of the screen in the white box, about a half a mile to the south. And I think there's two important things to note about its role and relationship between these two park development opportunities. They both have an opportunity to strengthen and reinforce the use of the park blocks as a series of connected destinations, and therefore a desirable way to get between points within the central city, which the north and central park blocks have never done quite as well as the south park blocks. So I think there's a real opportunity as you start to add purposeful destinations for it to also reinforce the role of the North Park blocks as a linear open space destination in and of itself. So zooming in on the immediate project area, you can see there's a number of reasons why this site is prominent within the central city and why the city has invested in it as a center of residential and employment growth. In addition to sitting right at this gateway to the central city, it also sits between and really separates the heart of the Pearl District from Old Town Chinatown. On the upside, it benefits from decades of infrastructure investment in the surrounding blocks. It has streetcar, light rail, Amtrak, and several enhanced bicycle corridors all around it. Almost everything in the darker green area shown here of the Broadway Corridor planning area is owned by the city of Portland. And so it really is a place where public investment, public planning, and public-private partnerships can be catalysts. The site has a major role in Portland's long-range planning and was projected to accommodate about 10% of the central city's residential and employment growth over a 20-year period. When the plan was passed in 2020, the expectation was for about 4,000 to 8,000 jobs and 1,800 to 2,400 new households. With the national and local office utilization trends, that's probably more likely to be weighted toward residential uses going forward. So I could spend all my time describing what's involved in a central city master plan, but for today, I'll just note that it does require identifying the location, scale, and purpose of public realm elements like streets and open spaces, with the recognition that specific design of these spaces will unfold over the years that follow. The public realm concept for Broadway Corridor really focuses on placemaking around two major axes through the site. One is what we call the Johnson Main Street, which extends a neighborhood greenway that is already established from along Johnson from the west foot of the West Hills all the way down to the Willamette River. And that's a connection that's currently blocked by the site, but would be unlocked by the demolition of the post office building. That Johnson Main Street deviates from the typical 60-foot right-of-way in Northwest Portland and establishes a wider width to accommodate additional public gathering spaces and protected bike infrastructure, and really has a great opportunity to connect the Pearl to Union Station, to the transit elements there, and to Old Town Chinatown. The other major element here is a triplet of new park blocks that will provide a terminus where the park blocks meet Johnson Street, creating a bit of a T there. So ZGF in place thought a lot about how to celebrate that terminus, how to think of it as both a node in the park blocks as well as a gateway for those entering the central city from the northeast. The introduction of the Green Loop really amplified the importance and the challenge in terms of how these two axes interact, because it introduced a 30-foot vertical transition to the horizontal intersection. So the Broadway corridor is one of several moments around the Green Loop where it makes a transition or a gateway between parts of the city, often over railways, freeways, the Willamette River, and in many cases that involves a vertical transition. So the master plan concept that ZGF in place developed with our partners at Prosper Portland and Parks involved using that transition to create elevated park space, climbing up a landscaped hill, providing moments to stop and look back at the park blocks, the city, and really provide an orienting moment in the district and in the central city. At the top of the climb would be a landing space that could be used for a variety of types of gathering, and then a bridge over Johnson connecting north to the Broadway Bridge. So this is a view looking north from Hoyt Street toward the Green Loop climb. And you can see that rather than simply having a building forming the north end of the park blocks themselves start to rise and climb and create this visual green terminus to the axis. So when we first proposed this, there was some question of, is this just going to be a bike ramp? And so I think it was really important that we convey and communicate that it itself was going to be places for truly a park, a rising park, a hill of sorts, and make that consistent with the goal of the Green Loop, which was not simply a bicycle pathway or a pedestrian pathway, but really that notion of linear open spaces with landscape, with public art, with places to gather and sit. And then of course, views back toward the city and the park blocks. And this is a view looking north over Johnson Street where a bridge would cross and then allow you to head north toward the Broadway Bridge. So I'll just stop there and happy to talk a little bit more if during the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Nolan. Now if you could, oh, there we go. We still have your screen share up.
Okay.
I don't know if I have the power to boot you. Maybe Sabrina does. There we go. Great. Yeah, so all the panelists can turn their cameras back on, and audience, feel free to give us some questions. I'm going to start with a few just between the panelists here. So Ross, I wanted to go a little deeper on the budget question because I think that's paramount. I see a lot of landscape architects are on the list tonight. I think everybody's curious, sniffing around for work or also interested in it civically. So what is the budget picture at this point in terms of any sort of permanent improvements? And maybe give us some sense of what you think the interim use, how long the interim use will be.
I think it all depends on the activation that we end up choosing after the long conversation. What is the budget picture right now is we don't have enough money to build something in a central city, to be perfectly clear. That's where the idea of this preliminary activation, what's going to work with a smaller budget, helps. And that's why this conversation actually is quite timely. So predominantly what would happen with the Parks Department, we would look to system development charge. And I don't want to go too far into a dark, really boring hole about system development charges, but there are fees that get assessed and then we use them to expand our system. The idea being that as developers develop and place burdens back on the system with whether new housing or density. We need to expand our system to meet the needs of the new and growing population. That has that one caveat, which is it has to expand the system. O'Brien Square, or what are we, parcel one, what are we calling this? Anyways, O'Brien Square. Block one. It's going to take me 8 weeks, Randy. It's going to take me 8 weeks. It was a plaza. It is a plaza as it's getting demolished. So that if we come back with another plaza proposal, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying if that comes, then the funding strategy gets a little more complicated, because one of our go-to funding sources for new parks is sort of taken away, because we can't show that we're improving, or well, maybe improving, but we can't show that we're expanding the system. So there are other grants that we pursue all the time. There's general fund if this really takes off and we capture the imaginations of the elected officials. And so it gets murky. But as far as like how long this activation goes, I can't quite give you that. I wish I did have that silver bullet answer to that question. But we tend to start conversations, we build momentum, and the momentum, if sustained, should get us there to a funding strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, and real quick, there's basically 5 potential sources of money. Well, let's say 6 if we include magic. But systems development charges, which are taxes on new development. General fund, as we all know, that's going to probably be tight as we transition our government for a bit. There are air rights. There was a question about air rights. There is a potential air rights sale for this. So we'll see if any, if any, opportunities come up in that realm. And of course, there would be a bond that could happen. There's talk about moving one forward for the system. And then lastly, there's private philanthropy. And then of course there's magic. You never know what can happen. I think this is an opportunity to, as Ross says, to build some momentum, and hopefully good ideas attract money. Let's see. I'm going to have some different glasses tonight, and the type in the questions is very, very small. So I'm going to do the best I can. There's a question about the cart blocks. So that's the park blocks, the carts that are at the intersection of 9th and Burnside. And the question is, are we approaching this O'Brien project with the knowledge that the cart blocks will likely not be around by the time O'Brien is actually ready to open? Nick, I'm going to toss that to you. I have some thoughts about it too, but PBOT's been in the middle of that. There's also a sort of a speculation that those carts are not making money, which I understand that's not correct, that they're actually doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't speak to all of the future of sites like the cart blocks. It is a public-private partnership where we work with community partners to make that site come alive. And but that site, that area is actually the edge of the North Park blocks. So it is still just an important destination and link in its own right. So that's always going to be like a site to link to. And as far as the Green Loop's considered, as soon as we get a traffic signal across Burnside of that location, we can start to make a strong connection between the North and the South Park blocks. But it seems to be, the question itself seems to be actually asking something about food carts and implication of if those food carts, the defining feature of the cart blocks, if those food carts are not there, where else might they be? And what is that relationship to O'Brien Square? So, that I can't answer.
There's been a lot of talk, and it started with something I worked on, some years ago about food carts in the right-of-way. What has PBOT discovered about that? Is there limitations around that? Is that something that we, could conceivably see with the various plaza designs? They're going to be taking shape around O'Brien?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think we can all imagine successful plazas from other cities, and some places have things like kiosks or sort of drink vending or some sort of business happening on the edge or is integrated into these plaza sites. So I think we are intrigued by how that might work. In our current phase where we're at in the world of street plazas, we're not really deep into things like utilities and dealing with some of the implications of trying to build things in the right of way. It's really important for people to realize that the streets themselves aren't just, flat with nothing below. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure going on below these streets, and that the public right of way has more to, it's not just the surface, it's what's going on beneath, and especially blocks like 9th Avenue with that major fiber optic utilities running underneath. So we definitely have a lot of challenges if we start to bring utilities out of private property, which is usually where they emerge, and into the public right of way. It's got a lot of questions we don't have great answers to. So that is an area of exploration for us in the future, but we have faced a lot of challenges just to get the food carts kind of set up and running in the space they're in now, with a lot of the new regulations coming out of Multnomah County that only complicates things further. So it's not off the table, but it's definitely needs a lot more work to research and figure out what it would really take to bring things, food carts or things like food carts, into street right of way in a real functional way.
Thanks, Nick. Let's see, another question. How many people are attending this? There were about 170 who are signed up. Sabrina can probably put it in the chat if we have a final count of how many people are on here. Let's see, question for Todd and probably also Ross. Is the process described intended for both the temporary and permanent park design efforts?
Todd, do you want to go first, or?
Sure. The way that we were, the way I was describing it, well, I think there's always value in continuing to get feedback and continuing to iterate. However, the initial kind of process would be, let's start to imagine together. Let's get as many voices as possible to imagine what future park might look like. Once those ideas emerge and processes, the design of processes are of how we might go forward are as important that might come up as what kind of programming the park might have. And then figure out activation to test that, right? Let's test it out with trying some things out on the site, seeing how they work, seeing what the implications are, seeing what maybe we couldn't anticipate, and then using that to inform long-term strategy. Does that answer the question?
Ross, anything to add?
No, I think from my standpoint, yeah, we're going to come up with some ideas on what would activate the park. And then I need some sort of drawing that'll come out. We'll get more into the details on that in March, some sort of drawing that backs it up as far as it could actually become a permanent thing and have a life. Now, if I could take that drawing and get permits and get built, that would be great. But I don't think you guys are going to have enough time in March to get me full construction drawing. So call it a concept and a schematic. The fact that it came free would really help too. But after we get the concept and schematic, we'll see where this goes and see how, like I said, does momentum build, and do we roll this thing into an active capital project after that?
So there's a question, does the requirement for parking under the square remain? No, it's gone. And there's a question about thinking a few people might not understand what you mean by activation in a park and an open space. So really that's just about, things that you do. So, it could range from a pickleball court or, a skateboard park to music to, art activities to, feed the mass. All of those are activations, and all of which, we will be, I'm sure we'll hear about during the course of this process. So the idea is, as we've described it, design a little, try some stuff out, design some more. And that's the sort of unique aspect of this process. We have a petri dish, to try some things out in and see how they work with this very, very diverse, group of stakeholders around the square. There's a question about the park as a significant historic resource in the inventory in the city's historic resource inventory. Does it have any demolition protections? Is anything being preserved from that? Ross, can you address that?
don't believe it does. Laura, maybe you have some information back in your days at BPS, but right now we don't have anything being preserved. I have a conversation with PBOT about the actual fountain and the structure and whether we can pull that off, but I don't have a use for it yet. So, and that's just a conversation.
Question for Nick. When can we expect to see a quick build activation of the right-of-way space to instill the green loop? Will this be happening before demo redevelopment of the square? And can we expect a green loop Pedapalooza ride sometime soon?
Yeah, I'm there for the Pedapalooza ride. We can do one this summer, absolutely. Quick build deployment of projects has been kind of becoming kind of a standard in American transportation infrastructure these days, mostly due to a sense of financial poverty. But in general, they're also really great ways to get stuff on the ground quick, to start to create change and really create a platform for growth. So we definitely lean into that model when it comes to things like the Green Loop. At this point, you know, the funding we got from the Economic Development Administration will be probably a step above the sort of standard quick build work that PBOT does. But that's not expected for construction until at least, you know, 2024 at the soonest. When you think about the streets adjacent to O'Brien Square, at least here in 2023, just remember that the O'Brien Square will be a construction zone. So not, you know, they'll be spilling into the street, they'll be occupying some of the street. I'll continue to work with the folks leading that effort to see whether there's compatibility there. But in general, construction zones are not great neighbors to public spaces and small public spaces like a street plaza. So we probably won't be building it until after this major demolition and renovation of the square itself happens.
Thanks, Nick. What kind of process do we anticipate for the renaming and rebranding of the space beyond Park Block 1? Ross, can you take that on? Ross or Laura?
Boy, I need a community engagement person from Parks Department for this. Park naming is a long process, and it is a process that's very inclusive. I don't have a plan for that. That's my blunt answer. But we would have one. It would be a long process, but it would be a good inclusive process to find the right name.
And I think there's a larger sort of naming process going on, re-examining a lot of, you know, street names and parks and whatnot. But if you email us, we can get back to you with some information on where that process is at. So question from Tim Davis: when will people be able to enter O'Brien Square, and when will the culinary corridor open? O'Brien Square, I don't know what the latest is on the demolition. Does anybody have a schedule of when that is anticipated to be complete?
Well, you know, starting next month in March is when I've heard this is starting, but it doesn't seem like it'll be completed until probably around September, at the end of the summer.
Oh, okay, a little later than anticipated.
That's what I heard. Late August, September.
Let's see here. Sorry, I'm a little behind here. Have local improvement districts been used to finance capital costs for new plazas in downtown Portland? In fact, well, somebody with maybe more knowledge of that, in my experience here, and I've been here a long time, local improvement districts in terms of park space, the only time it's been used is in the South Auditorium District to do some restoration work to the Halpern fountains, Keller, Pettygrove, and Lovejoy. And I was kind of in the middle of that. We put together a public-private partnership that was funded, the private side of it, through a local improvement district. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically the property owners, adjacent property owners, voting to tax themselves in order to produce some money to do renovations or a new park. Early when our many efforts to try to do something with O'Brien when the fences went up. We did explore an LID, and there was, some interest in that on the property owners, but that was also a very, very different market than we have today. So I think that would probably be a challenge. Air rights are probably a little more within grasp, at least in the near term. If anybody else has anything to add to that, that's my own speculations. I don't speak for the city in any official capacity on that. But I have been in the middle of it with the property owners for quite a long time. Let's see here. With the commercial real estate vacancy rate approaching 30% and businesses leaving downtown in droves because of crime, homelessness, sky-high taxes, and the inability of the city of Portland to accomplish anything beyond virtue signaling, how exactly is this all going to get built? How is it going to be paid for? And what is the time frame? Once built, who's going to use it?
Yes. I mean, that's what this whole conversation is for. To be perfectly frank, you raise all good questions, and but that's what this start of this conversation is. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think the whole group here has all the answers. So,
yeah, I think it's, you have to get started someplace, and a fenced-off square is, wasn't, doing anybody any favors. And so we're taking a step forward, and that's a lot of what this is about, is to create some excitement, and money will follow more excitement. It's a little bit of a Hail Mary, but for sure. But where do you start? It's an important space, and can be, we think, a very lively space. And so to that end, we have Frederick Wern, who gave us a vote of confidence, love the forward focus of the O'Brien Square process. How can we get some media focus on this positive process? Well, social media, and we are working on, we've reached out to quite a lot of media, so we'll hope we'll get some attention on this as it unfolds. How are you thinking about the visioning and civic engagement for this park in the context of the broader conversation about present and state and the future of the city? Is there a way to use this conversation to build engagement and a vision for a positive future? Todd, you want to take that on? Nolan, you've been involved in a lot of political issues too, so take it away.
Sure, I'm excited to hear what Nolan has to say. It's such a good point. This park won't be able to do everything, right? I think we're going to hear a lot of desires, a lot of interests. And I think we can think of those as being distributed in different ways to help think about what Portland needs. So it can't do everything, but it can be symbolic of the way that we want to approach projects, of the way we want to evaluate them and to test them and to think about them again aspirationally. So I think it's more symbolic than as a moving forward than this being a linchpin by which all of the work in the city gets completed. Nolan.
Nolan, we're entertaining the question of how civic engagement around this park could possibly be expanded to larger issues in the city.
Sure. So I think that the timing's excellent, right? We're all trying to figure out what the future of the central city holds. And I think almost any public realm project is going to be an opportunity to have that conversation about what the needs are right now. The biggest challenge that I see is we really don't know what 5 years from now will look like, what 10 years from now will look like with regard to office occupancy, with regard to residential growth. And so there was a comment in the chat that I liked, which was part of what we're doing in any of these public realm projects is creating a framework for the things that we don't know yet that are going to need to happen. The needs that people will establish for the community that's downtown in 10 years. And so it's as important that we get some of these specific ideas right about activation and design as that we create this space that can be flexible, that can be adaptive, that can be responsive to needs that we have in the future. So that's actually ironically rarely the thing that people talk about when they get together in a public engagement process, right? They're very focused on, what are my needs right now? What are the needs of my community right now? And so it's interesting to try to balance that need to maintain flexibility over a decade, especially in a moment right now that the only thing we can guarantee is that it's probably not going to be just like this, right? We're in a time of, we're still coming out of a major disruption. So definitely it's an opportunity to have that conversation. It's also really important that we maintain a sense of humility about how much we don't know.
Indeed. Thank you. So there's a couple of questions that are sort of related. One is, since we know that city blocks are what are called real estate, but are actually places with deeply embodied social, environmental, and economic stories, how would this team of discussants measure the success under the umbrella of restorative urbanism? And then also there's a question about honoring the past of say somebody like Hugh O'Bryant, in this process. Anybody want to take those two on? Don't all jump at once.
I'm scrambling for the first one. It was a long question about social environment. Okay.
It's a little abstract, but to put a point on it, is there a way of thinking about the social contexts that have been around, this square for a long time? I would say, I think youth culture has been huge there, from borders to, houseless youth. It also was an adjunct to the Pink Triangle. There was, Stark Street used to look a lot different than it does now. And I've heard tell of stories about O'Bryant Square, and activities there. So those are a couple of ideas that come to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about as a group necessarily, but I think could be really important in the in this temporary activation is storytelling and hearing the stories of some of Portlanders who have been in this space, used this space, know what it was like when it first opened or before that, and just kind of collecting all of that. I know that I think Todd, you've had some projects that incorporate a storytelling element, and I know that was something that Liz Ogbu came and talked about with the last round of Portland Parks Foundation talks. There was a significant storytelling aspect to the programming of a space that then informed what the space would be used for, because it incorporated the stories of the park's future users and past users. So I think that could be something that that we could talk about with this activation.
Let's see, there's been talk about a dog park possibility. I'm sure that there's a definite need for that. Whether that would be the only use, I mean, come and advocate for some portion of a dog park. I was talking to one of the Ritz developers, Brian Oendorf, about that, how that's probably going to be a need, given there's going to be a bunch of people more people living on it, on the square. So let's see. So this gets into stuff that we are going to be, this question about security plan, which I know that's, paramount on a lot of people's minds. And that's something that we really want to, address during the community visioning process, to really understand kind of how the various security entities in, downtown can, work collaboratively on this space, because we're going to, need it. But that's still sort of a, unanswered question at this point, because it is going to be a major new space that will reopen, and we'll have definitely its particular challenges, as all our open spaces do. There's a question about timeline on the Green Loop. Nick, are there segments of it that that you can see on the horizon with actual completion dates?
You know, it's a little bit tricky, right? The Green Loop in its current form is a planning concept. You see what was adopted a few years ago from BPS. It's more of a collage than a concrete plan. And so we've been working across bureaus to kind of figure out what the right path is to move it from this BPS planning concept into a collaborative capital project. You know, on some level, viewing it as a simple bike path, it does make the vision of doing a project a little easier. But I think we all have aspirations above and beyond just a bike lane for something like the Green Loop. There are a couple major gaps in the alignment that we continue to be working through that kind of make any functional section a little bit less useful. But I could see on the west side, one of the key links being that crossing at Burnside at Park Avenue. And I think that could unlock a very useful, very functional connection along the North Park blocks headed down towards the South Park blocks. Given the nature of funding and getting money secured for capital investments, that usually takes a while. So probably the soonest we could start to see a big link like that would be like 2026 or 2027. But even at this point, we don't quite have that roadmap. PBOT is expecting to start on a Green Loop concept plan that should be articulating both project extents for these types of functional projects that you're describing, as well as cost estimates and a phasing plan. So when that's done, we'll have a lot more firm answers about what might be possible in the near future.
Great. And then on the security question, Brian Oendorf from the Ritz developers, so they're working on a good neighbor agreement, which I know is in progress between the county, Portland Business Alliance, Downtown Neighborhood Association, that will address some of the questions and concerns that have been raised. From Parks Board member Sienna Corbin, considering we are dealing with heat waves and the heat island effect, can we seriously consider park activation at night and night programming when it's cooler and folks are not sheltering in place?
That's a conversation with the neighbors, but yeah, let's talk about it over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah.
And others who have maybe put questions into the chat, if you would be so kind as to put them in the Q&A. As I briefly mentioned, I'm dealing with some new glasses and I'm having a little bit of trouble with them. So hard enough to follow one Q&A, let alone both the chat and the Q&A.
I just want to note that I really appreciated this comment about thinking about the nighttime condition, not only because when we're thinking about activation, when we're thinking about programming, it's easy to get caught up in thinking about the season that you're in, right, as opposed to the one 6 months away, but then also different times of day, morning, evening, night, and also within the realm of anticipating hotter temperatures in the summertime due to climate change. So I think that there's it's a really great comment, and I think that the way that we should be thinking about these, the way that we approach it, the conversations we're having in the short term and the long term, seasonally, time of day, all that. So thanks for that.
There was a question about with all the success of the food carts on Block 216 before the Ritz, how come there's so few, in the Ankeny West space and the cart blocks, as it's called. I'll take a swing at that, and anybody else can jump in if they would like. I think it was a really different market. I watched that food cart pod grow. I was working in the Pittock block directly adjacent to it. During the time when that, grew. And it was, interestingly enough, in the last recession, and when it really took off, but there were so many more people working downtown and in the neighborhood, that it had, this kind of critical mass momentum. I think it's, food carts in downtown, there's a lot of questions around them right now, particularly with the new county rules. But I think that, the cart blocks, Keith Jones with with Friends of the Green Loop has worked arduously in terms of making what's there a success. Those carts are have made it through a very, very tough time, and they've had a lot of issues to figure out there. But I think that there's still the possibility for growth. We'll just have to see. Everything's kind of a moving target right now. But downtown is a very, very different market than it was when Block 216 was at the height of its success.
I guess I want to jump on that. My biggest fear of redeveloping O'Brien Square is that we're going to end up with another square that's lunch oriented. And I guess I'll just put it out there from my opinion, those days are gone. So I want to challenge everybody who's going to be involved in the next 6 weeks to think outside, as Todd was saying to the comments here, temporally, seasonally, I don't think another lunch oriented square will be successful. Especially when you think about what's happening down at the Broadway corridor. We have a lot of opportunities to change the spaces that we're working in. And we're hearing a lot of pressure from a lot of people for a lot of other things. So I just want to hope that in the end of the 6 to 8 weeks, we've expanded a little bit beyond that. So.
And then again, Mr. Ohendorf from Ritz said that they had over 70 vendors interested in the 10 spaces that they have in the food hall. So there's a lot of interest, but how that works out in the space is, I think, a real question, and one that we're going to vet. Ross jumped out there with some of his thoughts. I'd kind of like to hear, this is going to be a community process, but what are all of the panelists' hopes that will come out of this? What do you hope to see?
Well, I'll just say it's rare that you have an opportunity to do an interim use for an open space, and I think that's a little challenging to get your head around in some ways, but it's also a really great opportunity to do things that you might not be able to do if that was the long-term plan. And so getting people together to think about what are the things that you'd like to try right now, given we know about the struggles that the Central City is facing, and what are the ways that you create flexibility for the big idea that follows, or the growth of a small idea into a big idea. Those are super exciting. I think that we do want creativity. We do want to leverage the opportunity to think about the future with our neighbors as ways to get excited about downtown again, and even activate residential communities in ways that we need more than ever now, given that there's so much more of a driver of economic activity downtown. So I think that the conversation is a great community building conversation, and it may also result in really great public realm and activation outcomes.
Yeah, I'm just to piggyback on that. I'm really excited about the idea of experimentation. It's just to be sort of like upfront about the fact that we don't know yet, we don't have all the answers, and to invite the community to give us what their hopes and dreams are for this space, and let's just try it. Let's try it out without necessarily pledging that this will be the thing that gets built permanently. Like, let's see what works and what doesn't. And I see that happening more, I think, on our streets in Portland in the last few years with COVID. And I'm really excited to see, like Nolan was saying, like, well, what does this look like when you have a park space? It's not very big, and we have a lot of great assets already around it. So what can this one be? I think just learning historically, Randy's example of what happened when Pioneer Courthouse Square opened, and there was another plaza that was kind of bigger and better, maybe adjacent to O'Brien Square. So let's see what we don't have and what we do need, and hear from the community about what that is, and try it out, and play. Invite folks out to play and be in that space, and use that as a way to give us feedback. I just think it's a really exciting model.
I guess I would add, when I think about that location in our city, just physically the buildings around it, there's only one side of the park that maybe could see some level of redevelopment. These are old buildings, they're established buildings, they're important buildings, but they're not great buildings when it comes to engaging with a public space. And so I would like to think maybe there'll be exploration of how can we compensate for that, maybe within the park as a part of the future development. So is that more active use? Is that, you know, some talk of food carts, but maybe it's a beer garden, maybe it's something like what's in Director Park, something that can be bringing life to that space. And then, of course, I'm with the Bureau of Transportation. I'm here to kind of say to think bigger than the curb, think about how the street engages with the space. And I think we can help create a more dynamic place for everyone. There's some activities that can take place in a street right of way that can't really take place in a park, and vice versa. So let's be creative as we move forward in this the spirit of playfulness.
Yeah, I second all those comments. I have my architecture brain, of course, is flying all over the place, thinking it could be this, it could be this. I think that, but I'm really hopeful just to step back and hopefully lead a process to let things emerge that we couldn't possibly anticipate now. And I hope this is a moment when groups that are interested in helping to maybe activate the space temporarily find that there's a role they might play long-term in terms of a presence on site, in terms of programming, all those things that we couldn't possibly know until we see how things are used. I'm excited for the process.
Yeah, and for me, you know, I came to Portland in 1990 and have watched many studies of the so-called Midtown Park blocks happen. As a writer at the Oregonian, I played a small but initial role in helping stop a vision for a 12-story parking garage where Director Park is today. Other forces far larger than me stepped in and made the park happen. You know, looking at O'Brien, you know, been around for the food carts, all of this, you know, this just seems like such an excellent moment to take a more iterative approach to design. As you know, Nolan pointed out, you know, the only thing we know is everything's going to change. And so, you know, this is, you know, and there's also this larger context of all these other, you know, parks. There's still Pioneer Courthouse Square. There still needs to be some figuring out of Director. And so this is just a, you know, great opportunity to think more flexibly. Nolan, my Q&A once again blocked you. So I want to give you the last word.
Oh, well, I was just thinking the other thing that a community conversation like this can bring up is partners. And I think it's interesting to think about funding partners. It's interesting to think about potential activation and operating partners of all manner of types. And I think that that can be everything from who's activating it and, you know, providing a sense of security and safety in the evenings to, you know, who's having a festival there, or, you know, who just really wants downtown to thrive and has a few $1 million sitting around to fund a good idea. So I'm really hopeful that a lot of eyeballs and ears and mouths will engage in this process, and that it'll generate the kind of excitement that brings resources with it.
And there was a question about potluck in the park, and you know, can the space you know, serve a lot of, you know, financially challenged folks who are around it, and that's you know, we're really working hard to bring you know, advocates from those communities, you know, forward so that the park truly does serve everybody who's around it. So just want to plant that flag. So with that, our time is up. I want to thank our panelists. Really good opening discussion. Hope you can come back for some of the other discussions. Next up will be on Wednesday night at the same time will be a discussion with Sean Swaybe from New Avenues for Youth, and Roger Cummings from a Minneapolis organization called Juxtaposition Arts that works with youth in public spaces and all kinds of entrepreneurial activities. He's one of the fellows. And then also a young person Brant Mena, who really has some wonderful insights from his lived experience in downtown on the streets, and is working with a great group of partners to try to do activations across the city. So please tune in for that and look at the schedule for other opportunities of your interests in that we'll be presenting. And so I want to thank US Bank for being the sponsor of this conversation series, and our other partners who going forward will help this community vision process come to fruition. So great evening so far. Thanks everybody for your insights. This will be up on our YouTube site if you want to share it out, probably by end of day tomorrow or by first thing Wednesday. And so with that, we'll say so long. Thank you, everyone.